2, 1. Hi everybody, welcome here. Speak Up Monday here every Monday at Tropical Nomad, and we're back in the first episode of 2023, which I think is amazing. So we're back, and as you know, the first Monday of every month we have a special Health Hub Bali curated panel. Today we have Dr. Reshie that we'll introduce shortly, and of course Tracy G from Health Hub Bali. Now what we're talking about on this day are conversations that matter. So you have the Future of Health series and conversations that matter. And this is what 2023 is all about. So we have an incredible topic tonight, which I'll get Tracy to introduce after we introduce Dr. Reshie. But we're here for about an hour or so, around the 30 to 45 minute. That's when we have questions from the audience. So feel free to come and join us in person every Monday, or every Monday, Speak Up Monday, but the first Monday of every month for Health Hub Bali, this inspired panel. So Dr. Reshie, the thing which that grabbed my attention from the get-go, apart from your distinctive voice that everyone is about to hear, was the fact that you were a doctor, then an addict, then a psychologist. So it's most people that I come across here don't necessarily walk their talk, but you've been there. So when you speak, it comes with this authenticity of a person that knows exactly what they're talking about. It's within their soul. And this was the first thing that really grasped me about you, which even talking a little while beforehand, I get the same spirit, the same feeling, the same soul of you. So look, as a way to introduce yourself to the people here who maybe don't know you, maybe take a couple of minutes just to introduce who Dr. Reshie is, who sits before us today.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening to everybody online. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Robert, for a suspiciously generous welcome. We got the brown paper envelope somewhere, I think. As he's already said, my name is Reshie. I trained as a physician. I've lived most of my adult life and a great deal of my school life in England, and through a series of events went completely the other way and ended up at the nadir of that process as a homeless heroin and crack cocaine junkie. I'm happy to say that I'm not one anymore, so you can keep your wallets where they are. 2011 was when the process began to change, and since then I've made the decision to go into psychology and to study the subjects of trauma in all of its variations, its variables, its peregrinations, its permutations. It's a subject that fascinates me endlessly, and health in general. So I think that's about 2 minutes. Would that do it?
I think you did magnificently well. And look, so Tracy, coming to you, this is about the future of health, about conversations that matter 2023. So now what inspired this episode? If you'd like to maybe give a little intro for those people either here or watching from home, to give them a sense of what this episode will be about. And then we'll get into it.
Yeah. So we're starting a fresh year, and I think everyone's super happy about that, and to leave some things behind. But without leaving things behind, we want to look what we can actually learn from the past couple of years. And we're asking Dr. Reshie today, because of his background mainly in not just as an MD, but also understanding trauma and what we call Psycho Somatics, the effect of trauma, emotions on the body, and what may have happened to people over these last couple of years, what they may be experiencing, and going back even further than that, his understanding of the mapping of the body, what we call in Health Hub the Cartesian model, which is an old way of medicine, and we're leading into the future where we have a connected way of living that's and cared for in a new health model. Is that good?
Yeah. Very happy with that. Maybe I'll start with a minute or two sort of origin story, because I think many people must be wondering, street junkies don't normally come from the medical profession. I mean, that's not the route, that's not the standard route for trained physicians. So I think I'd like to say something a little bit about that. I was born in Singapore, mixed parentage, went to boarding school in England, and I was one of these boys who did very well at exams and academically. And so if you're a boy who does that, you are by definition, you don't have any problems. But looking back now, I can see that the problems were very, very plain. They were just so obvious with the knowledge I have now. But no one questioned anything about the odd things that I was doing, because boys getting straight A's, he's absolutely fine. And so it was, and I got into medical school. Medical school was the same. Passed my exams, did my attachments, and eventually graduated, became a doctor, and then began to work. And it was one event that unraveled the whole fake spool of my life. I had by this time been working on a pediatric oncology ward, probably the worst job you can have, to watch children die from cancer. And I'd made the classic rookie mistake of forming a very close bond with a boy who was dying from a very rare cancer. We had a very similar odd sense of humor. We were oddballs. He loved a comic called 2000 AD, which I did. There was one particular character in that comic called Slane Macroth, who was this big hulking guy with this double-bladed axe that went around hacking people's heads off. And anyway, we were very odd, but we were very odd together. And I didn't know it at the time. But what I was actually doing was I was forming the first authentic connection to another human being for the first time in my life. So that went on for months, and he got worse, and we, did everything that we could. And I'm very ashamed to say to this day that on the day that he died, I could not be present in his room. He asked for me to be there. He wanted to hold my hand as he slipped away. But to my eternal regret and shame, I didn't have what it took to do that. And then I remember going back into his room and sitting in it and looking at the empty bed, and all his stuff was still there. And this is an oncology ward, so they're big jars of diacetyl morphine absolutely everywhere, vials of it, and I remember being in the most pain I've ever been in. Is this searing, stabbing pain in my chest, in my heart, in my brain. My head was throbbing. It was just, I can't describe it. And at some point, the very bright idea came to me. I'm thinking, I looked at one of the little vials of, I think it was diacetyl morphine, which is the chemical formula for heroin, by the way. And I thought, well, maybe that will help. So I took it, rolled up my sleeve, drew up 0.3 milligrams into it and injected it. And it did help, because what it did was it made me not have to feel anything. People often think that addicts take drugs to get high. We don't. We take drugs so we don't have to feel, especially feel pain. That's why we take it. And in that moment, the pain just went away. And that was the start. And once I was on that treadmill, I'm looking back now. I mean, I don't think anything but an act of God would have prevented what happened from happening. I didn't slide all the way down immediately. I mean, initially when I was finally suspended from medical practice for there's a body in the medical council called the Fitness to Practice Directorate, and they deemed me unfit for practice until further notice. And there are plenty of people out there who just would love to snap up doctors who, for one reason or another, can't work. Pharmaceutical companies, international drug smugglers, you name it. Plenty of job offers, but
Reshie, one thing that I'd like to draw upon, because we had this chat earlier on, which I found incredibly powerful, was that you mentioned that the origin story, and you mentioned that there was a period of time that you had to be away from the profession, and you had to go through these tests and to ensure that you were clean, and you got to the end of that, and you were then deemed fit to practice again, but you made a different choice. Can you quickly just tell everyone what that choice was?
Yeah. I think that's Robert's way of very kindly telling me I'm rambling. No, so anyway, went all the way down to being a street addict, got clean, got sober, did all the tests required of me to be reinstated as a physician. Everything. And it's very, very rigorous. Finally passed it, was given the option, yep, you can start. Supervision 2 years, and then you're an equal. You're a brother again. And at that moment in time, I decided not to go back to medical practice. And I hope this doesn't sound, I'll tell you why. More slightly embarrassed to say it, but I hope this doesn't sound too arrogant of me to say this. But by that point, I had found the world of psychology and of counseling and of therapy, both for myself and for other people as well. I'd started to study it, started to practice it, started to do exams and to do that. So I had a fork in the road to go, and the decision was made like this. I could either go off and be a decent doctor or I could go off and have the potential to be an exceptional psychologist. Now, I don't know if that's true. These are just the thoughts in my own head. But I decided to choose the latter, believing that, yes, I could be a very decent physician, treat people, but in the world of psychology, particularly in the world, the suffering that is trauma, and that is my great interest, that given enough time, learning, and skill, that I could be something really exceptional and move the profession forward or make a difference.
Love that. And here's the thing, right? So we've been through 2 or 3 years of COVID and everything that's entailed. We kind of are aware that there's this elephant in the room that not many people are talking about. The fact that depression, trauma, and so on is potentially this tsunami in waiting. So I think what we're talking about tonight, part of what we're talking about tonight is, looking at that in a little bit more detail, and perhaps a good way to start would be to understand, what for you is a science behind trauma.
Yeah.
And we start there.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to try and keep this simple. If we look at the things from a psychological perspective, what are the things that allow us to stay healthy? The first is connectedness, the ability to connect with other human beings, to be with your friends, your family, etc., etc. That's the first. The second is the ability to be healthy, which is to eat well, to exercise, and to get enough sleep. That's the second. The third is the ability to control your own environment, to have some say, right, about where the furniture goes, or, what happens, and, the ability to influence, if you want. The fourth is the ability to be mindful. And I'm not talking about the practice of mindfulness in the meditative sense, but being present to the beauty of the place you've chosen to live. The fifth is the physical space you live in. And the sixth, which is, I think, the most important, is a sense of agency. Agency meaning that if one of the 5 things isn't working, I know how to fix it. What happened in COVID is that not 1, not 2, not 3 of these 6 critical components to our mental well-being were destroyed. All 6 of them were destroyed in one go. That's what happened in COVID.
Powerful. And then just to bring Tracy into this as well. So we're going to talk about psychosomatics in a moment, but just from what Reshie just said and filling in some of the gaps that the people might have here, what comes up for you? He's explained his background, what brought him to this moment, and obviously, those 6 key indicators, factors which are involved with his well-being. So what comes up for you at this point?
Probably to go back and establish the current medicine model and just explain how that understands disease, and then what you've learned, how that would impact health.
Okay, well, bearing in mind not to ramble again, when we look at ancient societies, whether China, the Greeks, the Romans, it doesn't matter who you look at, there is no evidence that they thought of the mind and the body as separate. In fact, it's almost universal in Stone Age cultures, Middle Ages, that it was just assumed that the mind and the body were one thing. This changed 350 years ago through a man called René Descartes and a system of thinking called Cartesian, named after him, Descartes, Cartesian mind-body dualism. Mind-body dualism really is an ontological argument that says that mind and matter are completely separate. Now, there are three different kinds of this, but again, I don't want to ramble, so I'll just put Descartes on the table, and he says, mind's over there, body's over there, the two have nothing to do with each other. And then comes the Copernican revolution. Most people remember Copernicus for the great work he did in astronomy. They don't know about this bit. He did two very important things. He codified this, and he wrote the books that could be disseminated so that people could learn it. And he categorized it into 4 different categories. Anatomy, to study the body, to study, that we are just biological mechanisms, and to understand ourselves, we study anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, and physics. Well, when I was in the first year of medical school, guess which subjects I did? Anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, and A-level physics. And it's the same today for the medical students. They do anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, and physics. It has not changed for 327 years. We're doing exactly what we did then. We're studying in exactly the same way. It's the exact same approach. That takes up, so that really brings us up to the present moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then that's that model. It's all separated. It's all in different silos. So we have the issue when something's wrong with us or we're not feeling well, we'll be sent to a specialist who will address whether it's our lung, our kidney, our whatever they are, and they cannot actually talk to each other, lymphatics, and it's quite frustrating for the average person and for the doctor as well. So with this future of health and what we've been developing the past 8 panels is to have a collection. We start interacting, and hopefully that each one of you can understand more and more and own your own health. Okay, so with all these different parts, the things as humans, we have a nervous system, we've got neurotransmitters, and all the systems are connected. Our thoughts, feelings, and emotions that run us and how we feel about things is what Reshie works with day in and day out. And the connection between disease and trauma or thinking patterns. Can you just share what happened with one study in Australia?
I'll come to that.
Yeah.
But I just suddenly remembered something that I think is very relevant to this discussion. It just suddenly came to me. During one of the periods where I was on suspension, I was still working, but I couldn't prescribe medicine, and obviously I couldn't, go into the pharmacies. And so they had me doing all the jobs that nobody else wanted to do. And one of those jobs was to see an 87-year-old lady. I still remember her name. Her name is Mrs. Jean Simmons. And every Thursday, she would dress in her finest clothes, and she would come, and at 5 minutes to 11, she would be sitting in the waiting room, and at 11 o'clock, she would have her session with me. And because I didn't have anything else to do, I spent a full hour talking to her. and we would talk, and she would tell me about whatever it was. There was a lot of emotional connection between us. We became very interested in each other's social circumstances. It was a relationship of sorts, although it was kept very professional. And at the end of the hour, I would prescribe her a little bottle of pink sugared water. You wouldn't get away with that today, but anyway, I would prescribe her this bottle of pink sugared water, 2 teaspoons a day, 3 times a day, and send her off. And she would faithfully take those 3 teaspoons a day, every day. And then I went off on holiday, and one of my colleagues covered for me. And I came back to the practice, and on Thursday at 11, I said, "Where's Mrs. Simmons?" And one of the nurses said to me, "Oh, didn't you hear? The week that you left, she died." And that was the first time I think I thought in my head that there's something more to this medical gig than just drugs and cells and molecular genetics and the study of bones and all that. That was the sort of the first clue. I'm sorry, it just came into my head, but it was as direct as possible evidence to me that there were other components that were responsible for health and well-being apart from, because I was not giving this woman any medicine. All I was doing was sitting and talking to her for an hour. That was all I was doing. But she had this thing where she would frequently touch my hand, and we would, we had a certain way of communicating, and it was very affirmational, and she felt like she could express anything she wants. Now, I'd like to contrast that with something else, the complete opposite, sadly. Very famous study done, I don't know any of you, but I'm assuming that a fair number of you will be Australians, given that this is Bali. So I've picked a study from Australia, and the National Health Statistics Review showed some years ago that there was a very, very large difference in the rates of breast cancer in women that lived out of the cities compared to women that lived in the cities, and that it was not for lack of access to healthcare, because they had the healthcare facilities, etc., etc. And they wanted to find out why this was the case. So they went off and they took a psychiatrist with them. I believe it was Paul Livingston, but I can't be absolutely sure of it. But this is the sort of thing he does. And he managed to get 2 questions into the questionnaire that they sent out to these women. And the 2 questions were these. The first question was, do you feel emotionally repressed, or do you feel that you are able to freely express how you feel? 1. 2 was, do you feel that you are adequately supported, or do you feel that the support you get is simply inadequate? Now, the women who answered yes to the first and no to the second, no difference. The women who answered no to the first and yes to the second, no difference. But the women who answered no to the first and no to the second had breast cancer rates that were 9 times higher than the control. And this caused a big problem, because You can't have an effect size when you publish a medical article. You have to show your data. You have to prove that, this is how you arrive at your conclusion. And basically what you had was an effect size of 0 multiplied by an effect size of 0, giving you 9. You don't have to be a mathematician to know that that doesn't make any sense. So that study, and this is one of countless studies I can quote you. I've used this one because I've been asked to, but there are countless stories covering everything from cancer to metabolic syndrome to asthma in kids. You name it, it's been done, that have decided, in addition of looking at the biology, they still look at the biological components, they still take the bloods, they still look at it at the cellular level, but they're starting to look at the emotional level. How do you feel when you have this? And they're also starting to look at the sociological component. Who's in your life? Who supports you? Who loves you? Do you feel loved? Questions like that. And increasingly we are finding that these are more and more important than we thought. In fact, a very famous lecture given by a Hungarian doctor at Harvard. In fact, there's a lecture named after him. He was a brilliant physician. He said in 1931, one of the most important things for medicine in the future is going to be how we as doctors connect emotionally with our patients. This was in 1931. But the real blow to the Cartesian model, the thing that really knocked the legs out from under it, came on September the 13th, 1848. A man called Phineas Gage, who was working on a work site, fell, and an iron bar went through his mouth and out his head, missing absolutely everything. Spinal cord, carotid arteries, jugular, absolutely everything, even his eyes. So he went to the doctor and they removed the iron bar and he seemed completely normal. But there was a section of his brain that was obviously missing. And suddenly his personality changed. His mind changed. He was like a different person. And there are detailed records of what he did, and I'm not going to go into that. And for the first time, there was direct evidence that this idea that the mind and the body are completely separate is complete nonsense, because we have a man whose part of his body has been removed and his mind has changed along with it, that they are connected. In 1977, we had the great George Engel, who put all of this together and came up with what we now call the biopsychosocial model of medicine. The old model is called the biomedical one, interested in cells, cellular, interested in medicine at the cellular level. Once you've explained it at that level, you've really done all your work. But the biopsychosocial model says that in addition to the biological, the psychological and the somatic, the two components of the psychological are the central, which is the brain, and the peripheral, which is the somatic, and the sociological, which is the environments we live in, are as critical to our health as the food we put in our mouths, as the medications that we take, and that many people are not getting well, not because they're not getting the right meds, but because they're either emotionally repressed or they're in a sociological situation where they feel oppressed or they feel unsafe. Many people do. And these are barriers to health. So Engel came up with that in 1977, and I'm not going to ramble because I warned you guys about rabbit holes, because I could just go down and start naming one study after another. So I'm just going to leave it there.
But a way that we say is that I'm going to land my plane there for now.
We'll land my plane there for now.
So I'm going to land my plane there for now, which is. But you know what? Give you a chance to drink some water. That's fascinating. I mean, I'm sure whoever's watching this, either here or online, again, out of what you said is phenomenal, because again, you've really and given body to it by those examples that you've given. Give a clear explanation that it's all connected, right? So Tracy, giving you a chance to come in on this, what's coming up for you, given that in about 10 minutes time, would love to go out to questions here and give people an opportunity to ask what is on their mind. I'm sure their minds are already thinking about what has just been said. I'm giving them time to let that sink in. That's why I'm talking. And now over to you.
I can tell you what they're thinking. They're thinking, when is cocktail hour?
I land my plane there for now.
In simple terms and more modern. Can they hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. In modern times, as we've come closer to this century, we have Bessel van der Kolk.
Yeah.
The body holds a score, and in, like I said, simple terms, for anybody to read that type of book, shows that the body, the fascia, whether the muscle holds the emotion. So when we lock that in and suppresses it somewhere there, so a lot of the body workers then would start working on people, say here in Bali, and they'll get cathartic, what we call emotional reactions. And that's something else you talked about, the emotion and the memory and the trauma, that connection as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A great number of the best books on trauma begin with the words, the body. I mean, this is the most famous one, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, the great Dutch physician. But there is The Body Bears the Burden by Robert Scaer. There's The Body Remembers by the great Babette Rothschild. I mean, you know, book after book after book begins with the body. So why? Why the body? Well, I think it's best explained by way of an example. I've had the privilege in my life to work with a very many number of women who sadly have been raped. And some of them present in what we call a dissociated state. They're completely blank. There's dissociation essentially is the separation of your thinking memory from your emotional memory, right? If I asked you what you had for breakfast, you would have a thinking part, you know, I had bacon and eggs and that, but you would have a emotional part. It was pleasant, it was nice company. So there's two halves to your memory. What happens in the process of dissociation is that gets split. The brain splits it because it considers the emotional part too overwhelming, and it removes it and suppresses it. So you've got the thinking part. They can sit there and they can describe to you, he did this to me, and then he did this to me, and then he did this to me. But it's like somebody reading the news. and I'm backing up in my chair, getting more and more horrified, and she feels nothing. So I send her to one of my best somatic therapists, who lives in Sydney and works with clients. I'm blessed with a very, very good team, and worked with her. And in one of their sessions, one of their yoga sessions, I believe, she had her in a certain position. She had her with her head just resting gently on the floor, and then had her moving her legs and her back. And suddenly, she was in the position she was in when the rape happened, because the guy slammed her face to the floor and pushed her legs in a certain way. And when her body moved into that exact position, bang, the floodgates opened, and I got a call saying, you need to get your ass in gear, because I think we've got a bit of a situation. And suddenly the body remembered. And I hope that clinical example explains why the body is so important to the healing of any kind of trauma, and how the system works.
So what? Hello. 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 Am I? Hello. Yeah. So what we're talking about, some of these situations, what we have survival mechanisms or armouring around the body that shuts down. And because what's happened, in the past we've talked about what's happened in the past, the impact of life, probably the last 100 years, and what we've actually inherited in ourselves, we can be living like this. So the idea now with Health Hub and understanding whole health, that we wake up and live. And just because sometimes we have patterns of behaviour from our parents, grandparents, who may be carrying the trauma, they say up to 4 generations or more, in ourselves, it may not be our issues, but there are modalities and ways to unwind this with practitioners. There's science behind all this, because otherwise this genetic issue of repeating things from our DNA through thoughts, feelings, emotions, whether they're real or not. And we're saying in Bali here now, we have the opportunity to explore. We have the time and space with professionals, a way to detox the cells, what we've learnt the last year in the panels, clean up the body so that we can start rebuilding. And that's where the retreats come in, Wake Up and Live retreats.
Yeah.
So look, at this point, what I'd love to do, Sister Ayu, right, so Reshie, so you're going to share this microphone with Tracy.
Right.
Ayu, if you just take this microphone for a little walk, right? So in a moment, any one of you here, I know it's been a pretty deep session today, but if any one of you have any questions, please feel free. This microphone will be one. Now, this part will be recorded. I know you have a question, Kendall. I knew that already. So I can sense you asking the question. So with these microphones, put it to your mouth, literally, to be heard. Now, this part is filmed. So anything you do come up will appear on a YouTube video. After this, when we close it off, we'll have time for a few private questions, which will not be filmed. And then after that, when we're closing the session off, I believe that Reshie will be on hand for a little bit of time. If you have any very private, personal questions, then I'm sure he'll be happy to answer them then. So, Kendall, over to you.
Hi, Rob. Thanks, Reshie and Tracy. I wanted to start by saying that I have a very personal experience of the body holding the score and my own healing journey, which I experienced here in Bali a few years ago and led me to working in the field that you're talking about. So I'm so excited to hear you speak about this in a public forum. I guess my question is There is a lot of politics in the medical industry and a lot of money at stake. And maybe this is going to sound cynical, but how do people like you and I, how are we heard over the huge marketing, let's say, machine that is behind the, can I say this, the pharmaceutical industry?
I promise you,
Just 1 second, he'll turn it up. Yeah.
I promise you, is it working?
Everybody on this mic? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I promise you I did not plant that young lady. I did not plant her.
We've never met.
We've never met. But that is the question, right? Given what we know now, why aren't we doing what we know actually works? Which is what she does, which is what he does, which is what you do, which is what so many people, I'm very proud to say that my beautiful stepdaughter Chelsea, who lives in Sydney, is, to my mind, one of the finest somatic therapists that there is. I mean, her ability to connect somatically with, I've never seen anyone like that, and others like Katie Nesbitt, and I've been so privileged to work with these people. So why aren't they at the forefront of this? Well, here's why. In 1991, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, which is we call it the Bible. It's a book that contains all the mental health disorders in there, and it has to be in there if an insurance company is going to pay for it, right? So, Bessel van der Kolk assembled a crack team of individuals to broach the subject of what he termed as developmental trauma disorder, what we would call childhood trauma. If you ask 1,000 therapists, is there such a thing as childhood trauma? 1,000 therapists will tell you yes, okay? And he presents the evidence, he presents the documents. It's a 1,671-page document. I've read the whole thing. It is so beautifully and meticulously presented. And the answer was no. And that was when I woke up to the fact that the reason why this is happening is there's no money in it. If I can diagnose someone with bipolar disorder, which is the commonest misdiagnosis for trauma, I can prescribe pills. That earns me a great deal of money. I mean, if I told you what the markup on pharmaceuticals were, your brains would explode. As an insurance company, I can be billed for that, and I can put up premiums, and I can issue riders, and do all of that. And the whole machine, the whole apparatus runs on the fact that the doctor has to be able to prescribe drugs, and if the condition is chronic, even better, because then we can prescribe them for years or months or whatever. I know I've just lost a few brothers in the fraternity. Sorry, chaps, but it's a well-known fact, that the medical industry is sewn up by 4 massive conglomerates, and by keeping the status quo, they make a huge amount of money. Now, if I took you and your wonderful talents. And I said, I have a young lady who's been raped, and I need you to work with her. That's slow, it's subtle, it's gentle, it's restorative, it takes time. Which insurance company wants to pay for that? How is the insurance company going to make money out of that? How is the doctor going to make money out of that one? How are the pharmaceuticals, how is any of these big concerns, how are they going to make any money out of it? They're not, is the answer. And that is why the working subgroup in 1991, regrettably, as we went from the DSM-4 TR to what is now the DSM-5, omitted developmental trauma disorder, and childhood trauma is not, in the American system, childhood trauma is not recognized as a legitimate disorder, and no insurance company is obliged to pay for it. I mean, you can put the kid in the war zone. He can't have trauma. It's not in the book. It doesn't have a code. You have to have a code. And this is what my life is, trying to help people with conditions that aren't specifically listed, but who really need help. But beautiful question, by the way.
That's so good. Ooh, nice. Today's been an interesting episode. We have a generator that's on. We have fireworks going on in the background. We have feedback. But you know what? The show always goes on. So this is good. So maybe Kendall, if you could maybe pop around and maybe for us from there, I think you get less feedback. Come and join Ricky in the front. Okay. Let's try that.
I was actually just going to make a comment and say basically the system's broken, and many of us understand that, and it's a matter of us continuing to do the work and with the passion and maybe not the financial support necessarily that the Western medical system receives. So.
And Tracy, you want to chime in with something?
Hello?
Yeah, no,
it's working now. All right. Okay. So where we start now is we have one model, which is that Cartesian model, and then we have another one, which we base on science, and which, so long as someone's gone through med school, they understand the systems in the body. And this is about raising whole health awareness, not just for the public, but also for the doctors. And when they see the interconnectedness, it doesn't take long for them to click. So we're in a change now. There are doctors, because they're also being affected, their families are being affected. And the diseases that we're talking about, pharmaceutical, are they diseases or are they a lifestyle issue? We're going to talk about cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and we're worried about some tablet or medication that the country can't afford. We had, here in Bali recently, we had somebody representing a country with 1.4 billion people, and they can't get the diabetic medicine. What about changing the diet? So that's what we're looking at now as life centres. We've got groups here that work with fasting, and we get the peer-reviewed papers. We start studying that because Bali attracts. And when we're talking health tourism here with Rob, we're talking over 1 million people coming through. We have centres here, and they can, with evidence-based science, we can run them through programs and protocols for whole health. We do proper assessments, we educate and we teach, instead of the last 30 years of tourism, which has just been doing a bit like, say, yoga or this or that. No, there's a science behind all this, and the body can heal.
You know, it's so aptly named, right? So the future of health, conversations that matter. So what we've discussed tonight has been the past, the present, and the future, and conversations that do actually matter a great deal, especially in this area, being that, as I said, we've been through 2 or 3 years of COVID, if that's what you want to call it, and we are already in the eye of the storm, with which no one's really talking about. So this is going to become something that's incredibly important, which I believe that people will start to listen to and look at episodes like this and really heed the information, the questions, and the advice that's coming forward. But look, I know that we're running close to time, but is there anything that you'd like to say or express that's connected to this? And then we'll go to Tracy, and then we'll wrap up this section after that.
I think it really is as simple as the coming down to the very first question we ask the people who come in to see us. I write a case study in a book. By the way, I've just published a book called A Beginner's Guide to Trauma. It's available at fine Amazon.com, bookstores, everywhere. Had to do the plug.
Plug away.
I discussed a lady who for 2 years had been sexually harassed by her boss. And every time she would go in to see him, he did what all doctors do, which is, so what's wrong? What's wrong today? What can I do for you? Right? I've done it myself, and she would say, well, I can't sleep. Okay, let's fix that. And then she'd come in another day and say, well, what's wrong today? And she'd say, well, I have these explosive tempers at my husband. Okay, let's give her a mood stabilizer. And then she'd come in again and he'd say, well, what's wrong? What's wrong? And she'd say, well, I'm awfully depressed. So he puts her on an antidepressant. Now, what if, instead of asking her, what's wrong with you, if he asked her, what happened to you? What if he'd done that? Her answer would have been, well, what's been happening to me is my boss has been sexually harassing me for 2 years and I can't take it anymore. Can you help me? It can be as simple as that. We have to start somewhere. We can start right there.
Tracy, summary to wrap up.
I think we should leave it like that.
More you can talk about on Tuesday Talks. It's a lot of things. Yeah. But now's a good time.
Thank you very much for coming, Dr. Reshie. And you represent a whole team of doctors throughout the world who have got all the knowledge and who do care. And it's about connecting to the tools, and that's why we said somatically, that can bring the life back into the body. So we're talking integrative medicine, we're talking entry point dysfunctional, so we get the baselines. We can measure even the brain now with Dr. Amen's work in America, and we can see what is the root of these issues and how we can help the traumas, and then the somatic work as well. So there's nearly hundreds of modalities these days to unwind. It's very personal, as we are as humans. But to be able to have the time and space to be guided through this and start exploring, and like we just said, wake up and live. So for this rest of the year, Dr. Reshie will be joining us on other talks, especially to do with the psychology of life. Bearing in mind, I think, I didn't say the figure, but like years ago they already said 85% of disease, the root cause was actually emotional. But our entry point is functional medicine to find the pathogens, but really it's about life. So that's what we'll be exploring here in Bali, and we're setting the platform up for that.
Beautiful summary. So everyone, thank you to Tropical Nomad, Dr. Reshie. Been a pleasure, brother. Thank you very much indeed. Tracy G, Health Hub Bali. Remember, Health Hub Bali you can find Instagram, all the usual channels. And Tuesday Talks, which is at Health Hub Bali in Preranan. So you're welcome to go and join them there to go really deep into these topics, even more deeper than we have done tonight. So feel free to do that. In the meantime, look forward to seeing you next week here at Tropical Nomad Speak Up Monday, 6:30. Come and join us in the live studio audience. Thank you very much indeed. A round of applause for the fans, for the audience that came. Round of applause for yourselves. Thank you very much indeed. We'll see you next week.